Cheeky bikers challenge wrong female Navy commander at a drive-in diner. The neon glow of the drive-in diner sign buzzed softly in the cool evening air, casting a warm light over the rows of parked cars and the small crowd gathered outside. Inside the lot, engines growled, laughter rang out, and the smell of sizzling burgers mingled with gasoline fumes. It was a classic Saturday night hangout, where bikers, truckers, and families mingled, each drawn by the irresistible charm of this roadside spot. But tonight, something, or rather, someone, was about to break the routine. At the far end of the lot, a group of bikers leaned against their gleaming machines. Leather jackets, tattoos, and cocky grins marked them as regulars who owned their space. They laughed loudly, their voices carrying over the hum of conversations. They had a reputation, not for causing trouble exactly, but for testing boundaries. They loved a good show, especially if they could spark it themselves. The reason for their sudden excitement was parked a few spaces away. A navy blue classic car, polished to a mirror shine. It didn't match the roaring engines or rugged bikes that surrounded it. It was understated yet unmistakably bold. But what really caught their attention wasn't the car itself, it was its owner. She had just stepped out, standing tall in her neatly pressed Navy uniform. A commander, judging by the insignia on her shoulder. Her posture was relaxed but firm, her sharp eyes scanning the diner's menu board as if it were a strategic briefing. There was a quiet authority about her, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted or flaunted. But to the bikers, it was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. "Look at that," one of them muttered, elbowing his buddy. "What's a Navy commander doing here? Out of her depth, don't you think?" "Maybe she's lost," another chimed in with a smirk. The leader of the group, a tall man with a beard that could rival a lumberjack's, chuckled. "Let's find out, shall we?" He started walking toward her, his boots crunching against the gravel, the others trailing behind like a pack of wolves on the hunt. Inside the diner, conversations quieted. People noticed the bikers' movements, their intent as clear as day. A few glanced at the Navy commander, wondering if she'd noticed the attention. But she seemed unfazed, casually stepping toward the counter, her focus entirely on placing her order. "Excuse me, Commander," the leader called out, his voice dripping with mock politeness. He tipped an imaginary hat. "Didn't expect to see someone like you in a place like this." She turned, her gaze meeting his. There was no hesitation, no flicker of uncertainty. Just a calm, steady look that made him pause for the briefest moment. "Good evening," she replied, her tone measured, polite. "Can I help you?" The man grinned, but there was an edge to it. "Just curious. A Navy officer, huh? Must be nice. Bet you're used to giving orders and having people jump." "Something like that," she said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. The bikers chuckled, sensing an opening. "Bet you think you could tell us what to do too, don't you?" One of them jeered. "Bet you think you're in charge here." The diner grew quieter still, tension crackling in the air. Eyes darted between the commander and the bikers, anticipation building. Would she walk away? Stand her ground? The bikers certainly didn't look like they planned to back off anytime soon. But the commander wasn't rattled. She took a deliberate step forward, her boots crunching softly on the gravel, and looked the leader straight in the eye. "Let me ask you something," she said, her voice calm but with a steel edge that made even the onlookers straighten in their seats. "What exactly do you think you're proving here?" That stopped him in his tracks. He blinked, caught off guard by her directness. His grin faltered for a split second before he recovered, shrugging it off. "Just having a little fun. Don't take it so seriously." "Oh, I'm not," she said, her tone shifting to something lighter, almost conversational. "But I do take respect seriously, don't you?" The bikers exchanged glances, some of their bravado slipping. The crowd in the diner was leaning in now, captivated. No one dared interrupt the standoff, not even the staff behind the counter. The leader crossed his arms, trying to regain the upper hand. "And what if we don't feel like showing respect tonight?" The commander tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Then she smiled, not a big flashy grin, but the kind of smile that hinted she knew something they didn't. "Well," she said slowly, "that's your choice. But choices have consequences. Wouldn't you agree? The leader's jaw tightened, and for a moment, it seemed like he might escalate the situation. The other bikers shuffled uneasily, unsure whether to back him up or hold him back. The crowd held its breath. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, something unexpected happened. A voice from the diner broke the silence. "Hey, Commander, your order's ready." The Navy officer turned casually, gave the group of bikers one last look, and then walked toward the counter to grab her food, leaving them standing there, unsure whether they'd won or lost whatever game they thought they were playing. But the night wasn't over yet. The bikers weren't the type to let things go, and as the commander headed back toward her car, their leader's hand twitched, his expression darkening. "This isn't finished," he muttered under his breath. The crowd exchanged nervous whispers, sensing that the real drama was yet to come. The commander placed her food on the roof of her car, carefully opening the bag to check her order. Her movements were calm and deliberate, a sharp contrast to the simmering tension behind her. She could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their irritation building. She didn't flinch or look back, but it was clear she hadn't dismissed them as harmless. Her years in the Navy had taught her how to read situations and people. This wasn't just a group of rowdy bikers blowing off steam. There was an edge to their behavior, a need to assert control. The leader of the bikers, still fuming from their earlier exchange, watched her with a mix of frustration and curiosity. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who didn't play into his games. "Who does she think she is?" he muttered under his breath, though the question seemed aimed more at himself than anyone else. One of his buddies leaned in, trying to diffuse the tension. "Come on, man. She's just grabbing her food. Let it go." But letting things go wasn't in his nature. His pride had been pricked, and in his world, pride was everything. He glanced back at the diner, where the small crowd had resumed their chatter, though their eyes occasionally darted toward him and his group. He didn't like feeling like the center of a story he wasn't controlling. As the commander climbed into her car, the leader took a few steps forward, gesturing to his friends to follow. "Not yet," he said, his voice low. "Let's see where this goes." The roar of motorcycles suddenly filled the air, shattering the quiet that had briefly settled over the parking lot. The bikers mounted their bikes, revving their engines as if to announce their presence all over again. People at the diner turned to look, some shaking their heads, others watching with cautious interest. The commander glanced in her rearview mirror but didn't react. She shifted into gear and began to pull out of the lot, her car's taillights glowing like small beacons in the night. The bikers followed her onto the open road. It wasn't a full-on chase, at least not yet. But their intentions were clear. They weren't just heading in the same direction by coincidence. The leader, riding at the front of the pack, smirked as he closed the distance. "Let's see if she's as tough on the road as she is in a parking lot," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The stretch of highway was quiet, the kind of road that seemed to go on forever, flanked by nothing but empty fields and the occasional street lamp. The commander kept her eyes forward, her grip on the wheel firm. She could hear the low rumble of the bikes behind her, growing louder as they closed in. She wasn't afraid, not yet. But she was alert, her mind already running through possible scenarios and responses. This wasn't the first time she faced a situation where she had to stand her ground. The bikers began to spread out, flanking her car on either side. One of them pulled up close to her window, his grin visible even in the dim light. He tapped on the glass with a gloved finger, a mocking gesture. She glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable, before focusing back on the road. The leader pulled ahead, cutting in front of her car and slowing down just enough to force her to brake. The group laughed, the sound echoing through the night like a pack of coyotes. It was a game to them, a show of dominance. But the commander wasn't playing along. Instead of reacting with frustration or panic, she kept her movements controlled. She adjusted her speed, maintaining a safe distance behind the leader while keeping her car steady. It was a subtle move, but it sent a message. She wasn't going to be rattled. The bikers, however, weren't satisfied. They wanted a bigger reaction, something to prove that they had the upper hand. The leader glanced over his shoulder, his smirk fading as he realized she wasn't giving them the satisfaction they were looking for. "Fine," he muttered, signaling to his group with a quick hand gesture. The bikers began to close ranks around her car, their engines roaring louder as they boxed her in. The leader slowed even further, forcing her to nearly stop. The game had escalated, and the tension was palpable. Inside the car, the commander's jaw tightened, though her expression remained calm. She took a deep breath, her mind racing through her options. And then, in a move that caught everyone off guard, she flipped on her high beams, flooding the road with blinding light. The sudden glare startled the bikers, causing them to veer slightly out of formation. It was a small victory, but it gave her an opening. She accelerated, weaving through the gap they'd unintentionally created and putting some distance between her car and the pack. For a moment, the only sound was the roar of her engine and the rush of wind as she sped down the highway. But the bikers weren't done yet. The leader's face twisted into a scowl as he motioned for his group to regroup. "Let's go," he barked, his voice barely audible over the noise of the bikes. As they picked up speed, closing the gap once again, the commander's heart raced. She knew this wasn't just about egos anymore. The situation was dangerous, and she had to end it before it escalated further. But she also knew she couldn't afford to let fear dictate her actions. She needed a plan, and fast. Up ahead, the faint glow of headlights appeared on the horizon. A semi-truck was approaching, its massive frame dominating the opposite lane. The commander's mind raced as she calculated the timing and distance. She glanced at the bikers in her rearview mirror, then back at the truck. The leader of the bikers, sensing that something was about to happen, narrowed his eyes. "What's she up to?" he muttered, his grip tightening on the handlebars. The commander's hands steadied on the wheel as she prepared to make her move. This was it, the moment where everything would come to a head. As the semi-truck barreled closer, its headlights growing brighter in the rearview mirror, the tension in the air thickened. The bikers were right on her tail now, closing the gap, their engines growling like beasts of prey. But the commander had already made her decision. This wasn't just about proving she could hold her own. It was about taking control of the situation before things spiraled completely out of hand. In one fluid motion, she swerved her car sharply to the right, cutting across the highway in a calculated, high-speed maneuver. The bikers, not expecting her sudden move, scrambled to adjust. The leader's eyes widened in shock as the commander raced toward the oncoming lane, straight for the semi-truck. There was no time to hesitate. For a split second, it felt like everything had slowed down. The truck's massive wheels thundered toward her, but she didn't flinch. She held the wheels steady, knowing that timing was everything. At the last moment, she veered back into her lane, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision. The bikers, still disoriented by the move, had no choice but to break formation, scrambling to regain control. The leader's bike swerved dangerously, fishtailing before he managed to steady it. Behind him, his group followed suit, some of the bikers nearly losing their balance. But the commander wasn't done yet. With a quick glance at the rearview mirror, she saw the gap between them had opened wide. The bikers were out of position, and it was clear they weren't going to be able to catch her now. She hit the gas, her car roaring ahead as the road stretched out before her. In her rearview mirror, she saw the bikers gradually falling further behind. They tried to speed up, but it was too late. The commander had already won. The pack of bikers, humbled and outpaced, slowed down as the realization set in that they were no match for the calm, collected force of the Navy officer. A few minutes later, the road began to flatten out, and the commander pulled into a rest area, her heart still pounding in her chest. She parked her car, took a deep breath, and stepped out, the cool night air rushing to meet her. From behind her, the sound of approaching bikes grew louder once again, but this time, when the leader and his group finally rolled into the rest area, they did so slowly, their expressions no longer full of challenge, but tinged with something else, respect. The leader dismounted and walked up to the commander, his demeanor noticeably different than before. His cocky grin had vanished, replaced by a more thoughtful look. "You're one tough woman," he said, his voice no longer taunting. "Didn't think you had it in you to take us all on." The commander raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "It's not about toughness. It's about making the right moves at the right time. The group of bikers stood silently, exchanging glances, but none of them said anything more. The respect had been earned. The tension dissipated. They were no longer challengers. They were just people, acknowledging someone who had stood her ground in a way they couldn't have anticipated. The commander took one last look at the bikers before walking away, heading toward a bench where she could catch her breath. As she sat down, she allowed herself a small smile. The evening had started as an unexpected challenge, but it had ended with a reminder that respect isn't something that's demanded, it's earned. And as the night fell quiet around her, the only sound left was the distant hum of the road and the soft chirping of crickets in the cool night air. It had been a test, one she passed. The bikers, meanwhile, didn't stick around much longer. They revved their engines and rolled out, still processing what had just happened. They'd been expecting a confrontation, but they had gotten something much more unexpected. A reminder that sometimes the fiercest challenges aren't the ones you face head-on, but the ones you face with calm precision. The commander's quiet victory on that deserted highway would be one story that, at least for tonight, no one would forget.